Hi, today I'm going to be talking about calcium, which is the most abundant mineral in the body. Alright, to start off, calcium is an essential mineral and it's vital for any normal bone and tooth development. The RDA for calcium is 1,000 micrograms, but for women over 50 and men over 70, it raises to 1,200 micrograms a day. And adolescents should have 1,300 micrograms a day. So the general recommendation is 1,000, but it depends on your age group, really. And there is an upper limit for calcium, which is 2,500 mg a day. Okay, so some of the major functions of calcium. The biggest one I can think of immediately is bone development and maintenance. So calcium is one of the main minerals in bone, and calcium helps make hydroxyapatite, which binds to collagen fibers in the bone. So the collagen protein allows the bone to absorb impact, so if you're jumping, your bones won't break. But the hydroxyapatite crystals, which calcium makes, helps makes bones strong. So if you were jumping, your bones wouldn't bend or collapse. So it's a very important part in bone. Calcium is also stored in the bone and can be used when calcium intake is insufficient. So pretty much what happens here is if you are not intaking enough calcium in your diet, you will have low calcium in the blood. And when you have low calcium in the blood, the parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone acts on osteoclast cells in the blood to release calcium from bone into the blood. Osteoclast cells are also considered the bone breakers. So they go into the bone and they break down the bone. And when the bone is broken down, it will release calcium into the bloodstream. So parathyroid hormone, which is released when there's low calcium, also acts on the kidney to conserve calcium and forms calcitriol. Calcitriol acts on the small intestine to increase absorption of dietary calcium. So pretty much, if you're not having enough calcium, all the functions in your body will try to work to get as much calcium into your bloodstream as possible. And by doing that, your bones are actually being broken down. So that's obviously not good. On the other hand, when you have a high amount of calcium in the blood, so too much, calcitonin is released from the thyroid gland. And calcitonin, what it does is it inhibits the osteoclasts, which break down your bone, and stimulates the osteoblast cells, which build up your bone. So pretty much what's happening is when you have a sufficient intake of calcium and you have a high blood concentration of calcium, your bones stop being broken down or they're actually being built up, which is kind of what we hear about, like, build strong bones and teeth. And I have a quote that says, "Milk provides good amounts of many of the nutrients needed for building bone. Drinking milk during childhood, the bone-building years, is associated with a lower risk of fracture later in life." And this comes from our textbook, Wardlaw's Perspectives in Nutrition. And the reason, as I said earlier, that it's associated with a lower risk of fracture is because when you have that high amount of calcium, your bones are being built up instead of broken down. And when your bones are being broken down with low calcium, obviously you have a higher risk of fractures. All right, so here are some major functions of calcium in metabolism. So first we have blood clotting. So calcium is an important part of the clotting cascade. So when you get a cut or a nick and you start bleeding, it helps actually form the clot, which will help you develop the scab so you stop bleeding. And I'll explain a little bit more about this on the next slide. But it also helps with muscle contractions. So calcium is released when the muscle is stimulated, and this, along with ATP, allows the contractile proteins to slide against each other, which is what causes the muscle contractions that happen in the body. It also helps with transmission of nerve impulses to target cells in the body, to any tissues. So to release any neurotransmitters, you need to have calcium come in first. Calcium is the trigger that helps release neurotransmitters to trigger the target cells, and I'll explain a little bit more about this as well. So this, I know it looks scary, but this is the clotting cascade. This is what the mechanisms in your body that help you stop bleeding. And right in the middle of the screen, you can see how prothrombin goes to thrombin. Now, to make this transition from prothrombin to thrombin, prothrombin needs to have calcium. And so when calcium is present, it can go to thrombin, which then you can see makes fibrinogen turn it into fibrin, and then goes to the cross-linked fibrin clot, and that would be the scab that you see on any sort of cut that you have, but you can't get to that point, the fibrin or the fibrin clot, unless you have calcium to help prothrombin turn into thrombin. So it's obviously, calcium is a very needed substance in the body. And so this picture, this is showing how calcium is needed to stimulate neurotransmitters to activate target cells. So you can see the green green entry points for the calcium, and so the calcium will enter, and once the calcium enters, it stimulates the neurotransmitters to bind to the target cell, which causes a reaction to occur. So again, it is a very needed thing in the body. Okay, so now some food sources of calcium. Obviously we have the ones that we normally think of, like milk, cheese, and yogurt, and that's actually, growing up, I thought that milk and calcium were kind of interchangeable for each other, because we always heard the phrase like, milk builds strong bones and teeth. But it's not actually the milk, it's the calcium inside the milk. But as a kid, I can't really think that there's a difference. But so what's interesting is that there's calcium in a lot of other foods that aren't even dairy products. So there's calcium in collard greens, in soy milk, salmon, tofu. And then you can see that in the picture, whole grain total cereal has 1 cup of that has 100% of our calcium for the day. So there's a lot of other things in the diet that help contribute to calcium other than dairy products, and so we should be eating 1,000 micrograms, and there's a lot of food sources that help us do that. Okay, so now talking about calcium deficiency. So the biggest thing with calcium deficiency is osteoporosis. And so it's been very prevalently linked to low calcium intake, and it's a disease that has to do with your bone density. So osteoporosis is when your bones become more brittle and less strong, and so you can see it's diagnosed when bone loss and strength decline to a certain degree. And there's a way to measure bone density. It's called a DEXA scan. They're usually kind of expensive to do, and they're not that common, but there's actually a place in Idaho Falls where you can get a DEXA scan. But it measures all of the bone density in your body and body mass composition, and can tell you if you have brittle bones or not as strong as bones as you should have. Osteoporosis isn't something that's going to happen quickly. It happens over a long period of time, and it happens when you have low calcium intake, because, like I said earlier, the osteoclasts will be breaking down your bone to get the calcium inside the bone, and so your bones are being broken down. And it also can develop when you aren't doing any weight-bearing exercises, because when you do weight-bearing exercises, your bones become stronger and your osteoblasts are building up the bone to withstand the pressure. So osteoporosis is linked with low calcium intake and no weight-bearing activities. So make sure you have enough calcium in your diet and are doing some lifting, some strength activities. And then this quote comes from our textbook as well. It says, "A calcium-rich diet decreases bone turnover, increases bone density, and reduces the risk of fractures calcium should come primarily from food sources, not supplements. And I'll go into that a little bit later as well. So this is just a picture showing the difference between a normal bone and a bone with osteoporosis. So you can see that the bone with osteoporosis is a lot less stable, a lot less strong, more brittle. It will break a lot easier. So you can see why there's increased risk for bone fractures. So that's osteoporosis. Calcium toxicity. So there is an upper level for calcium. So while it does do many good things for your bones, you can't just take it willy-nilly. So calcium toxicity, when you have above the upper limit of 2,500, you have an increased risk for developing kidney stones, and an increased risk for hypercalcemia, which is just excessive calcium in the blood. And excessive intake can cause irritability, headaches, kidney failure, decreased absorption of other minerals. So while there are lots of benefits to calcium, it's within a certain range. You need to be within the optimal range because like anything in life, moderation in all things, and moderation in calcium is good too. So some interesting facts about calcium. I thought it was interesting, but many Egyptian mummies were actually found to have signs of osteoporosis. So that's kind of cool. You can trace the history back into it. Calcium can also be made into a substance called plaster of Paris, and that was used to set broken bones 1,000 years ago. Also, calcium carbonate is good at neutralizing stomach acid, and so it's found in many medicines like Tums and Rolaids. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't really know that calcium helped with that. All right, so from the media, I read an article on the Harvard website. It was a Harvard published article, and it was kind of refuting recent evidence that had come to light. So recent studies have suggested that there is a link between the use of calcium supplements and a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. However, a Harvard published article suggests that there is no good evidence that suggests calcium supplements can harm the heart. But the article again suggests that it is best to get calcium from foods and not from supplements. And they suggest this because supplements can cause constipation and increase one's risk for kidney stones. And also, you don't get all of the phytochemicals and other nutrients that come from obtaining calcium through the diet. So again, you really should try to get all the calcium you need through the food that you eat. And the food that you eat that is calcium rich is healthy, good food, like the collard greens, which have phytochemicals, and salmon, which is high in protein. So it's really important to not just turn to supplementation, but to try to really increase it in your food. However, Harvard did say that they didn't find any evidence that calcium supplements harm the heart, but there may be other harms to it. So that's something to keep in mind. So in conclusion, calcium is really essential in making sure our bodies run smoothly and do the things that they're supposed to do. Like, it helps with our blood clotting. It helps us be able to have the bone strength we need to move and do everything we want and need to do. So it's really important. Calcium is vital to bone health, and proper dietary intake can lower one's risk for osteoporosis. And osteoporosis is very prevalent, especially in the older you get. So the more we can do to offset that now, the better. Calcium is not just found in dairy products, so vegans, people who follow a vegan diet, can still have a sufficient intake of calcium if they are eating the right foods. And calcium supplements are not generally recommended, so individuals should reach the calcium RDA by consuming it in their diet, like I said previously. So here I have my references. I took a lot of the information from our textbook because it was stuff we'd all read and stuff that was peer-reviewed and everything. And then some little jokes for your guys' amusement. So they stole my milk. They needed the calcium to rebuild their broken bones. And then the tooth fairy is depositing some calcium deposits into the bank. Anyway, just for fun. Well, thank you for listening, and that's my presentation on calcium.